I suspect we have a.
Welcome, everyone. Today is the 4th of October, 2023, and this is the API Server Network Proxy meeting. This is a subproject meeting of SIG Cloud Provider, and as such, we follow the Kubernetes SIG's guidelines, which is essentially please treat each other kindly. And I would say raise your hand, but there's only 3 of us. So, yeah, Joseph, you were just about to say something. Please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I was going to say, I suspect we have a relatively light agenda. We could probably have a short one. I will just volunteer that I opened an editor and began again the effort to update the CAP template to conform to the latest template. It's not ready for review, but it is work in progress. And then I dropped one PR that I know Walter has already seen because he gave a code review pass. And then based on his feedback, I had an open question, and I suspect you haven't seen my open question yet, but it has to do with hardening the protocol now between the proxy agent, the connectivity agent, and connectivity server. I intended to do just a pure code cleanup, but what it sort of exposed was, I think there's maybe 2 good reasons to have the connectivity server maybe handle unrecognized or invalid agent identifiers more gracefully. Non-controversial. So I know Walter's sort of caught up and understands the question. And is it non-controversial? You would just say, yeah, go.
No, I think it's worth discussing. I mean, I think there are 2 alternate perspectives on this. Strictly speaking, I think this is not a backward compatible change for one edge case. So I think just from that perspective, it's worth discussing. I would be okay with it because I think it's such an edge case, but I think it is worth discussing.
The edge case is the same point you brought up about like how we weren't parsing agent identifiers in the default strategy case, and now we are. Yeah, and that's one of the 2 reasons I can think of to fail gracefully.
Right, but in the old world, we didn't fail gracefully in that case, so it's technically not backward compatible.
I'm sorry, you're saying even if I adjust it to fail open, it would still not be backward?
Oh, you're saying? Oh, I'm sorry. You're saying fail open. Okay. I misunderstood. I thought you were saying that maybe we should just sort of very carefully tighten the ratchet and say, like, let's actually fail as gracefully, but actually fail.
Right. No, sorry. That's what this PR as is would do. And there's a reasonable justification for doing that because it means somebody's configured the agent with a bad set of identifiers and they would get visibility, but sort of possibly in a breaking way. But no, the version skew scenario that I laid out, I think that's also a reason to sort of just ignore unrecognized agent identifiers. Basically, like let's reduce what proxy server will reject to a smaller set. Like you must have an agent ID that's not empty. But like do a best effort parsing of agent identifiers.
I mean, if we had no backward compatibility, I actually have a weird suggestion, and which would be that if we knew the relative versions of the agent and the server, I would suggest that if the agent is ahead of the server, what you're saying makes some sense. If the server is at or ahead of the agent, I actually wonder if it would be better to fail. My thought process is that if there is a new strategy that comes with new agent identifier types, that it makes sense to just ignore the agent sending types that you don't understand, because you can I think you maybe assume that the agent is just on a strategy that you have yet to be that a newer version of you would understand. if you are at or ahead of the agent, then the assumption would be this isn't a question of a newer strategy, and so it is likely a misconfiguration of the agent, and you can help debug those problems faster by actually, erroring the agent with something that actually shows the problematic agent identifier.
Well, I think that's actually exactly the right place to put it. If we want to have more strict validation so that we don't swallow bad errors, it should be done by the agent. It should not be done on the server, like far away. And this is server code.
So you're saying the agent parses its own identifiers?
I think that the agent should also be, responsible to make sure that the URL encoded parameters look okay.
Okay, and then soft fail on this, not even fail, but just ignore unrecognized on the server side.
I feel like ignore unrecognized on the server should be the right decision.
I kind of like that with that combination, but I'm also interested in El Miko's opinion.
Honestly, like I don't feel comfortable enough with like my knowledge of the topology here to be able to say like one way or the other. But like I think in general, I like the notion of preserving the backward compatibility if you can. I guess like maybe you could help me out a little bit here. Like in general, the way connectivity works is you've got this server, and then each of the nodes that are connecting to it have a client that runs that helps to coordinate that network transaction. And the question here is that with this new upgrade on the server side, it needs to it should react a certain way when it identifies a client connecting. And if it doesn't identify the client's, I guess like version identifier or whatever, or like you're saying it's agent ID, then what should the server do with those connections? Do I understand it correctly?
You 90% there.
Okay, cool.
So I think the thing that is missing that is worth talking about is agents have multiple identifiers. And the reason we let agents have multiple identifiers is what we call the routing strategy. And so when the server is trying to determine where to send the traffic, the server has been told an ordered list of routing strategies to attempt. And so out of the box, if you do nothing, the routing strategy that picks, the routing strategy that we use is just called backup. But what it actually is pick a random agent. It doesn't matter where you send the traffic. The idea being that as a general rule, Kubernetes says that traffic should be routable between nodes. So it doesn't matter which node we send the traffic to. Once it ends up in the data plane will take care of routing the traffic to the correct place. Now, just to use the one that actually caused this feature to be added, an old contributor to APIServer Network Proxy was working with, I think, edge nodes, if you're familiar with the concept of edge nodes, and did not have routing between nodes. So the basic idea was, I actually want you to send traffic based on IP match. Send IP or CIDR, whichever. But I want you to send traffic to the node that matches the destination IP address, and I don't want you to do random traffic routing. So, and then another person said, well, I kind of like the idea of IP match, but if it doesn't do it, I actually have routing on data plane routing. So I actually would like both. So what we came up with a scheme where you say you just list in order the set of matching criteria you want. If you say that if you don't provide anything, we assume the default, which is random. If you just want IP match, there's like an IP match strategy. If you wanted to do IP match strategy and then default to like if presuming like the agent is dead or something. You want to default to random, then you can do like IP comma random or IP comma default. Okay, so that's that's kind of the server side concept of the routing strategy. To make that work, though, the agents have to advertise their agent identifier, right? So it's these are key name pairs, right? So UUID equals UUID is the one that we use by default. That's the default agent identifier. But you can also have like IPv4 equals IP address, IPv6 equals IP address, host name equals some host name string, and those are each then usable by the appropriate routing strategy. And so when you're doing the handshake with the server, you have one, or you should have at least one UUID, but you have one or more agent identifiers that you use that the server then puts into the backend manager, so that the routing strategies can do the appropriate kinds of lookups to get to the appropriate connection to send to. And so that handshake, and so what we're specifically talking about is that handshake where you advertise which agent identifiers apply when the agent connects to the server.
Okay.
Did that make sense? And do you have any questions?
It does make sense. I'm still a little hazy on when the client connects to the server, the agent as we're calling it, it sends an agent identifier to the server, or the server like calculates an agent identifier. How does that work?
It sets a set of agent identifiers. So it doesn't
Okay.
just, it might send one, it might send four.
Okay. And those could
But
be
yeah.
those are the different routing methods. It might have like an IP address, it might have a host name, it might have a CIDR or whatever.
So I actually dropped a link to something that could illustrate it back at the agenda document. If you're presenting,
Oh yeah.
I dropped a link there to a work in progress. But those couple of commits that build on the one that's in review,
Okay.
I noticed that we don't have good unit tests for header.go and the server code paths that choose the agent based on proxy strategy or based on routing strategy. So I wanted to backfill some test coverage. So like some of these tests illustrate this. Like you have an agent connect with just blank default, and then you make sure that it's selected. Then you have a different scenario where the proxy server has dest host routing strategy. I think this should be the, if you maybe keep scrolling. If the proxy server has dest host routing strategy, and then does not follow comma default, then it only routes to dest host. So if an agent is connected, but none of the connected agents have the host, then it will actually not pick an agent. Like cases like that.
Okay. And so we're really talking about the failure mode though, when the server has received these agent identifiers and then has some problem like with
Parsing.
one or many of them, right? And what should it do at that point?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And like agent ID, the primary agent ID, that's critical for our overall tunnel protocol.
I mean, so I guess like my first question is if it's just one agent ID and the server can't parse it, then I think we should obviously like, throw lots of errors and like so the users have an idea of what's going on there. But if there's multiples, is it an acceptable behavior to say, well, I don't understand this one, I can't parse it, but I do understand this one, I'll just connect to the second one? Is that a valid strategy for deploying this?
Potentially, but actually let's drop back to your first statement.
Okay.
Because here's the weird part. Before we ever built routing strategies where we assumed that, because we were using the old SSH tunnel behavior, which was just randomly pick. At that point, we didn't actually have a need for an agent identifier. And so there's a switch block that Joseph's replacing where we switch based on the various routing strategies. And all of the new routing strategies cause the agent identifiers to be parsed. But if you actually look at the default strategy, it doesn't use the agent identifier because it just assumes that you randomly pick from the complete set of available agents. So it just doesn't care. And so this is the backward compatibility piece where where it says, look, the default strategy doesn't care about agent identifier, except that this code change is making us care. And
Right.
this is exactly what I had flagged.
And the agent identifier is just a key to match with the actual rule or something. It doesn't actually have value by itself.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, it has one additional little bit of value in that if you're doing log statements, the UUID is essentially, if you're looking at what's going on in the server and you're trying to associate it to a particular agent, the UUID is the only way to actually understand which agent a particular connection is or the server is having a problem with, right?
Yeah.
So if you're trying to track it from a logging perspective, that agent identifier on the default is valuable, but otherwise it's not actually used in the business logic for that one routing strategy. For all other routing strategies, we use it.
Right. So like you're saying, you know, to keep backward compatibility, we have to kind of keep this keep this behavior, but at the same time, so like can we deprecate this behavior? Can we announce now that like we're deprecating this so that however many releases of Kubernetes from now, we can just say that you're not allowed to not have an identifier? Is that something we can do?
Not have an identifier or something?
Right. Like if the old style, if one of the methods of acceptance for the older style of communication or the current style, the backward compatible style, is that I can send you my data without an agent identifier, right? That's accepted right now. But can we say from an API perspective, we're going to deprecate that in the future? So in the future, after however many releases we've gone through, we're not going to allow we're not going to allow connections that don't have an agent ID associated with them.
We could. I mean, the other thing that Joseph is suggesting is that, and we can always revisit this in a couple of releases, but I think what Joseph's suggesting is we make the server passive or whatever, and allow people to not for agent identifiers to not parse, and then if you send and please correct me if I'm wrong, Joseph, but if you send agent identifiers that don't parse, the server is going to add you to the complete list of agents, but only the default route. You'd only be registered with the default routing method, so that's the only one that would work for you. And in addition, in the agent code itself, it's going to attempt to parse any agent identifier, because normally the agent identifiers are passed in through the command line. He's going to validate the agent identifiers at the agent side, and it would blow up. So if you write your own and you try to work with us, which you're allowed to do, right? You're allowed to write your own agent. It's a public API. And you don't properly send us the things, we'll work with you in the default mode. We just won't work in any other mode. But the agent side won't come up properly, but the idea there is at least that's a lot more visible. And so it's like, hey, this thing doesn't look like a valid thing. You probably typoed this. I don't know what IPv.4 is.
Yeah,
exactly. It's a flag. Somebody could typo it in a YAML and easily not notice it. And the best way to notice it is on the agent failing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, I obviously have no experience running this thing. So like, you know, in terms of like debug modes and whatnot, like from a user experience point of view, like it feels it doesn't feel good to not have that identifier there. So like, even if we have the server say, yes, I will continue to accept these connections that don't have an identifier, that doesn't feel like good UX from the debugging side. Because I presume that an administrator, if they try to like figure out a problem, they're going to look at the server logs and try to figure out like what happened from this. Now, I get what you're saying, Joseph. Like, inverting this would mean that if you fail to do that on the agent side, then you would immediately see an error when you try to start the agent, because you wouldn't, but that's only if you decide to participate in that agent logic, right? Like, I could write an agent tomorrow that just never sends a good value for the agent identifier, is what it sounds like. Like,
Right.
if that was just what I wanted to do, right?
Right. So if you write your own agent, we can't fix it, but at least your agent would be allowed to act as a default agent as far as routing goes.
I mean, I think that's cool for like backward compatibility. I would love to see us moving in a direction towards better user experience, though. Like, in my mind, it would be better user experience just to always require that identifier to come through.
So I think that the thing, and this is why I mentioned the idea of, we could do what Joseph's suggesting today.
Yeah.
And then we can then revisit ratcheting further, which, as you said, like, we might want to, we might want to say, look, we're going to deprecate this particular behavior, and when we go to this release, we will actually require agents to successfully send.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, totally, I agree with like doing what Joseph's suggesting now for today. That definitely makes sense. And then the follow-up work would be like, could we write a KEP or something that announces the deprecation of this API? And then, yeah, we could plan like in 3 or 4 versions, then we can make it so that it's always there, and we can kind of remove some of this behavior. Like, that would make sense to me.
It produces an interesting topic I don't think we should dive into right now, which is how do we want to deal with those kind of things, given that we are Kubernetes adjacent, right?
Yeah.
So we are a sample. But at some point we should think about how we handle that. I mean, I like the deprecation. But there's what we want to do about deprecations and what do we want to do about caps. I think when we want to make changes to the API server, it is very clear that we need a cap, and it needs to be an API machinery cap. I think when we want to make changes in other parts of API server network proxy, it's not clear that we need a cap, which isn't the same thing as we don't want a cap. But I think we should at some point think through what our policy around that is.
Yeah, I mean,
so maybe
go ahead.
So the breaking change would be the idea on the table of having the connectivity agent more strictly parse that command line flag than before. That's the sort of technically non-backwards compatible change, but it's kind of like adjacent, the sort of borders on bug fix, maybe.
Right.
I think that one we're willing to live with. I think that the thing that we're saying was back a little too backward and compatible is having the server not accept, at least for the default case, not accept, which I think is basically was your proposal, Joseph. Or accept, yeah, you know what I mean. Sorry, I'm not being clear, but it's the server should accept or should be permissive on failures to parse, and should at least right now leave it to the agent to do the strict parsing.
Yeah, there's only one parser, so I may need to split it into a default and a more strict version. And you'll see that in that work in progress. There's a unit tested headers.go. So this conversation is relevant to that. I'll make some changes, and I'll give it its own PR to
Sounds
avoid
good.
cluttering this one.
I mean, the other possibility is we just return an empty list and we just, assign it an ID, and because there's an empty, it just never gets added to anything else.
Right. That's what that was going to be my next kind of follow-up question, is like, can the server, another way to approach this would be like, if the server sees a connection with no agent ID, can the server create an agent ID, like a temporary agent ID that obviously will only exist for the lifetime of the server, but, something that's like clearly demarcated as like temporary dash, whatever. And then if a user were debugging it, at least they would have some notion of like, okay, I realize these connections have been made and I can see the server is keeping track of them differently. But I don't know if that's actually valuable or not, or how
Oh, I think
complicated
at
it would be.
least one statement at the beginning where we basically say, failed to parse string that failed to parse using temp ID would be very valuable, actually.
Okay.
I can see a downside to that. The
Okay.
agent has can support modes where it syncs, it retries to sync forever, and if the server is always taking a connect RPC from the agent with a missing agent UID and then assigning it a unique anonymous one, then proxy server is going to have a memory leak.
Mm. So describe that again, Joseph. I'm not sure I follow.
Sadly, I do.
Oh, so you're saying like if it breaks the connection and then recreates it, we create a new entry and now we've got like double entries or
No,
something?
sort of, but so one of the things that so there's, depending on what's going on, and this has to do with the work in progress thing that I haven't worked on in a couple months. The assumption is for most people like Google, Amazon, I think even Red Hat, that when the agent goes to connect to the server, you're going from the data plane to the control plane, and chances are there is a load balancer sitting in front of the connectivity servers. And since there is a load balancer, there isn't a way in that model, there's no easy way for the agent to go, these are the 3 connectivity servers I should be connecting to. So the way it tries to actually accomplish this is it connects, and then and one thing we should look at is, one possibility on this, Joseph, we could think about would be, I don't think we have a connectivity server ID, but there is the possibility this could be solved by having a connectivity server ID. But sorry, that was a orthogonal. Let me get back to the gist. It connects, and as part of the handshake, it's registering its ID with the connectivity server. And so the connectivity server, when it sees the same client connecting more than once, will send back a note that says, sorry, I have seen you before, go away. Right? And so the connectivity, so a little bit of history. So the original version of this was, in addition, the handshake tells the connectivity agent how many connectivity servers there are in the first time it successfully handshakes. And so it will use that as its goal state, and it will keep trying to connect, and occasionally getting, nope, I already have an established connection with you, go away on this connection, and that connection gets closed and it retries. And then it would get to, there are 3 connectivity servers. I have 3 established open connections. I must therefore be connected to all of the connectivity servers. Great. And then Joseph, and yeah, I'm totally throwing Joseph under the bus on this. Joseph came up with this use case where it's like, hey, as part of rolling upgrades, I actually want to add a 4th connectivity server. And so can I have this mode where I can connect an additional time to try and determine whether there is a new connectivity server that has been added. So there'll be a periodic interval, and I'll just occasionally try to connect again, and you'll tell me to go away, unless, of course, I've added a new connectivity server, at which point you'll tell me, oh yeah, there's a new connectivity server you should connect to. And now the behavior of the rolling upgrade that we want can work. Because of that, if we can't identify that uniqueness constraint, we're never going to stop. Like once a minute,
Right.
we're going to try and connect to that rolling upgrade and but the server can't identify that you're an old agent. So you just, from its perspective, you just keep looking like new agents. And it's like,
Right.
wow, I have a
Right.
very large cluster.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. So I mean, I guess like then we're back to kind of like Joseph's original solution here. It seems like that's the best path forward.
Well, two comments. One is, Walter, I think that you did a good job illustrating basically some of the complexity that could break if we're like maybe too clever with graceful handling missing agent ID. But now that you're jogging my memory, I think maybe it's the agent responsible for recognizing that it's connected to a duplicate server and then
Yeah.
disconnecting, isn't
Like
it?
I said, if we have a proxy, if we identify by server, we'll be fine. But I didn't remember for sure which server duplicate was the one that was responsible.
But that memory leak concern is still real because of the way that some of those backend storages have the list of all connections for a given agent ID. It's a sensitive area to. I think that we should strictly require that an agent strongly give us a unique agent UID. I think we should like really strive for that.
Is there like an agent framework project that people use to build their new agents, or is it like wild west?
So it's Wild West with the comment that as far as I know, it's a hypothetical.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more likely. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Tim Hawkin has reached out to me, and I've never heard back from him on this particular subject. I've heard back on others where someone was actually discussing doing this. If you look back at a very early KubeCon I did, I think it was like Shanghai 2019. One of the things we discussed, and I just don't feel like repeating myself, was the idea of, hey, if you wanted to be able to run APIServer network proxy over a VPN, could you do it? And it's one of the topics I touched on there. And it's sort of you can do it. What you'd probably want to do is either take the existing code and replace the gRPC tunnel between agent and server on your own, or you could come to this particular group and work with us to have an alternate to that gRPC tunnel between agent and server. It's doable. You could certainly see how you might do that particular tunnel segment over a VPN if that's what you wanted. Come chat with me. And so we have put it out there that doing that sort of thing is possible. It's the reason we always refer to this as the reference implementation.
Yeah.
But as far as I know, no one's actually ever gone and implemented their own. Everyone just uses the reference implementation.
Okay. So because like the reason I'm asking is because like this, what Joseph's talking about here with like making sure the agent does the right thing with respect to its ID, that seems like the perfect behavior to encapsulate in the reference like architecture, right?
It is. It's just at the same time we're in this weird middle ground where we're the reference implementation, but we're also the implementation.
Right, totally. Well, maybe something to think about for the future if we want to if we want to separate that out and actually create something like the cloud provider SIG has with its cloud provider repo. Maybe we want to have a connectivity agent repo at some point that's just like here's something you could use to build with or whatever.
Yeah.
Well,
all right.
Yeah, thanks for breaking this all down for me. It really did help, and I do feel like I understand it a lot better now.
Awesome. Shall we cut the recording?
Yes. Before we do though, I realize we're over time, but I just had a quick comment for Joseph. I created a slide deck for KubeCon and shared it with you like through email and Slack. I don't know if you've had any update. I don't know if you had any updates about travel approval or anything, but
no, I'm still not approved. I was not approved, so it looks like I'll attempt to co-present virtually. Like I'm gonna try to make the case for maybe like a 1 day flight, but I think that that probably get me there all jet lagged. So I think virtual is what we should currently shoot for.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
I will look into some of the options for virtual presentation. And I guess like if you want to, feel free to add slides to the slide deck, or maybe I'll just add them. And then if you, depending on how you want to do things, you know, if you want to have like, I guess we could just keep all the slides there and you can just run it from your deck or something when you're virtually present. I don't know. I guess we'll figure that out.
Yeah. Sorry for the bad news, but yeah. I just saw your deck that you shared this morning. I'll add some slides with some
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's nothing in there now. I figure as long as we get something together by the end of the month and get a practice session in, I'm good to go.
Yep.
All right, cool. I will. Thanks, everybody.
All right. I did want to have